Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll say it again. I mean, I think these Bitcoin treasury companies are Bitcoin adoption. They're Bitcoin adoption by the financial markets, by the big players in Wall Street. It's not the same as looking at Solana and going, "Oh, I want to punt around in this nonsense," right? Like I try my very utmost best to help people understand that it's Bitcoin only. It's really hard. Sometimes people just get tempted by the other tokens. And obviously, as you say, there's a lot of very clever marketing that happens with all this stuff. But the Bitcoin treasuries are Bitcoin adoption. And I think it's different. And I think it's really important to just make that distinction. Sure, to your point, there will be a point that it's painful. There are tears. You know, Metaplanet, when it was down in that tiny stock price phase, when it went to all the way to 21 MNAV, well, it crashed back down. But now look at it. And if you'd bought at that 21 times MNAV, you'd still be way in the money because they're accreting. And so long as they're accreting and they're using the financial markets effectively to do so, they would just keep going higher and higher. So I think there's a scale problem, which is why I think Pomp's made a bit of a mistake. And I think 21 Capital have made a bit of a mistake. They've started way too big, right? They can't scale, they can't yield to the same degree. So they don't have the same level of torque, as we call it, as these smaller companies. And when you're doing that torque and you're making the multiples, that's when you build the community. That's when people become diehard fans. MicroStrategy obviously built a whole load of diehard fans over 5 years with pretty much no competition. Right? There are people, and myself included, that will never sell a core allocation in MicroStrategy. Just won't. Right? That for me, I love the way Saylor has continued to innovate. He's continued to tap different pools of capital in the market. And I think as we move into phase two of this thing, as I alluded earlier, when you start looking at the banking type services provided by these very large holders of Bitcoin, that's where, again, MicroStrategy is going to be leading the way.
Richard, can you put a finer point on what you just described around basically starting at a lower base? Because I think that to some that might be a little counterintuitive. If like the goal of all these things is to acquire a ton of Bitcoin, why is it a bad thing to start with a huge slug of Bitcoin? Like, can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, take 21. I mean, 21 Capital is a good example. So they started with 42,000 Bitcoin. No one was allowed to participate. It's basically Tether, Bitfinex, SoftBank, right? So they've all put their Bitcoin in, right? The way that you measure the validity of the MNAV on these Bitcoin treasury companies is you look at their Bitcoin yield, right? Metaplanet, I think their yield so far this year is something like 300%, right? You look at the smaller companies, it's into the thousands of percent, right? So that's accretion of value to the shareholders, right? And remember, so let's say Smarter Web, they did a capital raise, I think 2 weeks ago, where they cut their MNAV in half, essentially. So they went from 12 times MNAV to a 6.5 times MNAV, right? And then the MNAV slowly drifted up again, which gave them that torque to be able to do it again. So they just did a capital raise last night where they do it again, right? So they cut the MNAV in half again. So long as they keep doing that and they keep sustaining the amount of Bitcoin, then the value base, i.e. the collateral, i.e. the Bitcoin, keeps just growing at a much faster rate. And so when you look at a company like Metaplanet last year and you go, Jesus Christ, they went up 2,500% in a single year. And by the way, that was only 3/4 of the year because they only started in April. That's unsustainable. And that's your natural reaction if you're Jim Chanos, right? And these sorts of people. But actually, the stock's gone up another, I think, 500% so far this year. I mean, we started the year, we were sort of $2.50. So, I think it's about $11 today, right? So that's nearly 5 times, right, that it's gone up. So when you look at that and you say, okay, that's what's propelling that? It's the torque, it's the Bitcoin yield, right? And for 21 Capital to have Bitcoin yield to replicate Metaplanet, they need to add 160,000 Bitcoin in the next few months to just replicate Metaplanet so far this year. So it's impossible for them to do so, right? Like even with Tether behind them, it's going to be very hard. I think Tether's entire Bitcoin holding is 100,000. So it's just a question of growth, and when they get to maturity, and you could argue that MicroStrategy is mature, he needs to have had a track record of trust in the market where people know that he is going to do everything to just accrete more Bitcoin, and he's going to keep tapping different capital pools, which is exactly what he's doing. He is absolutely relentless and singularly focused, and he's shown the market that consistently for 5 years. How's Jack Mallers and 21 Capital going to show that same level of track record without the talk, right, that these other companies have to compete with him? They're building a fan base. And whether you like it or not, because you can then compare it to ICOs, these communities become diehard fans. I'm a diehard fan of MicroStrategy and Metaplanet, right? And so, I think as the next ones emerge, if we, put a little bit of capital into those and they show us they are trustworthy, they show us they're capable of execution, they show us that they're capable of financial engineering and innovation, then they will create diehard fans.